So how would you run a whole country without oil? That's the question that sort of hit me in the middle of a Davos afternoon about 4 years ago. And it never left my brain, and I started playing with it more like a puzzle. The original thought I had, this must be ethanol, so I went out and researched ethanol and found out you need the Amazon in your backyard in every country. About 6 months later, I figured out it must be hydrogen, until some scientists told me the unfortunate truth, which is you actually use more clean electrons than the ones you get inside a car if you use hydrogen, so that's not going to be the path to go. And then sort of through a process of wandering around, I got to the thought that actually if you could convert an entire country to electric cars in a way that is convenient and affordable, you could get to a solution. Now, I started this from a point of view that it has to be something that scales in mass. Not how do you build one car, but how do you scale this so that it can become something that is used by 99% of the population. The thought that came to mind is that it needs to be as good as any car that you would have today. So, one, it has to be more convenient than a car, and two, it has to be more affordable than today's cars. And affordable is not a $40,000 sedan, right? That's not something we can finance or buy today. And convenient is not something you drive for an hour and charge for 8. So we're bound with the laws of physics and the laws of economics. And so the thought that I started with was, how do you do this still within the boundary of the science we know today? No time for a science fair, no time for playing around with things or waiting for the magic battery to show up. How do you do it within the economics that we have today? How do you do it from the power of the consumer up and not from the power of an edict down? And on a random visit to Tesla on some afternoon, I actually found out that the answer comes from separating between the car ownership and the battery ownership. In a sense, if you want to think about it, this is the classic batteries not included. Now, if you separate between the two, you could actually answer the need for a convenient car by creating a network, by creating a network before the cars show up. And the network has two components in them. First component is you charge the car whenever you stop. Ends up that cars are these strange beasts that drive for about 2 hours and park for about 22 hours. And if you drive a car in the morning, you drive it back in the afternoon, the ratio of charge to drive is about a minute for a minute. And so the first thought that came to mind is everywhere we park, we have electric power. Now it sounds crazy, but in some places around the world, like Scandinavia, you already have that. If you park your car and didn't plug in the heater, when you come back you don't have a car. It just doesn't work. Now, that last mile, last foot, in a sense, is the first step of the infrastructure. The second step of the infrastructure needs to take care of the range extension. See, we're bound by today's technology on batteries, which is about 120 miles if you want to stay within reasonable space and weight limitations. And 120 miles is a good enough range for a lot of people, but you never want to get stuck. And so what we added is a second element to our network, which is a battery swap system. You drive, you take your depleted battery out, a full battery comes on, and you drive on. And you don't do it as a human being, you do it as a machine. It looks like a car wash. You come into your car wash, and a plate comes up, holds your battery, takes it out, puts it back in, and within 2 minutes you're back on the road, and you can go again. If you had charge spots everywhere, and you had battery swap stations everywhere, how often would you do it? And it ends up that you do swapping less times than you stop at a gas station. As a matter of fact, we add it to the contract. We said that if you stop to swap your battery more than 50 times a year, we start paying you money, because it's an inconvenience. Then we looked at the question of the affordability, and we looked at the question, what happens when the battery is disconnected from the car? What is the cost of that battery? Everybody tells us batteries are so expensive, and what we found out, that when you move from molecules to electrons, something interesting happens. We can go back to the original economics of the car and look at it again. The battery is not the gas tank in a sense. Remember, in your car you have a gas tank, you have the crude oil, and you have refining and delivery of that crude oil is what we call petrol or gasoline. The battery, in this sense, is the crude oil. We have a battery bay, it costs the same $100 as the gas tank. But the crude oil is replaced with a battery, just it doesn't burn. It consumes itself step after step after step. It has 2,000 life cycles these days. And so it's sort of a mini well. We were asked in the past when we bought an electric car to pay for the entire well, for the life of the car. Nobody wants to buy a mini well when they buy a car. In a sense, what we've done is we created a new consumable. You today buy gasoline miles, and we created electric miles. And the price of electric miles ends up being a very interesting number. Today, 2010, in volume, when we come to market, it is 8 cents a mile. Those of you who have a hard time calculating what that means, in the average consumer environment we're in the U.S., 20 miles per gallon, that's $1.50, $1.60 a gallon. That's cheaper than today's gasoline, even in the U.S. In Europe, where taxes are in place, that's the equivalent to a minus $60 barrel. But e-miles follow Moore's law. They go from 8 cents a mile in 2010 to 4 cents a mile in 2015 to 2 cents a mile by 2020. Why? Because batteries' life cycle improve, a bit of improvement on energy density, which reduces the price. And these prices are actually with clean electron. We do not use any electron that come from coal. So in a sense, this is an absolute zero carbon, zero fossil fuel electric mile at 2 cents a mile by 2020. Now, even if we get to 40 miles per gallon by 2020, which is our desire, imagine only 40 miles per gallon cars would be on the road. That is an 80-cent gallon. 80-cent gallon means if the entire Pacific would convert to crude oil, and we'll let any oil company bring it out and refine it, they still can't compete with 2 cents a mile. That's a new economic factor, which is fascinating to most people. Now, this would have been a wonderful paper, so that's how I solved it in my head. It was a white paper. I handed out to governments, and some governments told me that it's fascinating that the young generation actually thinks about these things. Until I got to the true young global leader, Shimon Peres, president of Israel, and he ran a beautiful manipulation on me. First, he let me go to the prime minister of the country, who told me, if you can find the money you need for this network, $200 million, and if you can find a car company that will build that car in mass volume, in 2 million cars, that's what we needed in Israel, I'll give you a country to invest the $200 million into. Peres thought that was a great idea. So we went out and we looked at all the car companies. We sent letters to all the car companies. 3 of them never showed up. One of them asked us if we would stay with hybrids and then we'll give us a discount. But one of them, Carlos Ghosn, CEO of Renault and Nissan, when asked about hybrids, said something very fascinating. He said, hybrids are like mermaids. When you want a fish, you get a woman, and when you need a woman, you get a fish. And Ghosn came up and said, I have the car, Mr. Peres, I will build you the cars. And he actually, true to form, Renault's put $1.5 billion in building 9 different types of cars that fit this kind of model that will come into the market in mass volume. Mass volume being the first year 100,000 cars. It's the first mass volume electric car, zero emission electric car in the market. I was running, as Chris said, to be the CEO of a large software company called SAP, and then Peres said, well, once you run this project, and I said, well, I'm ready for CEO, and he said, well, no. You got to explain to me what is more important than saving your country and saving the world that you would go and do, and I had to quit and come do this thing called Better Place. Now, we then decided to scale it up. We went to other countries. As I said, we went to Denmark, and Denmark set this beautiful policy. It's called the IQ test. It's inversely proportional to taxes. They put 180% tax on gasoline cars and 0 tax on zero-emission cars. So if you want to buy a gasoline car in Denmark,